Before we listen to the bombastic, inspiring, and inaugural introduction to the Liberator, published on January 1st of 1831, it's important to review a few key facts about the Liberator and its author. William Lloyd Garrison published the paper weekly from 1831 to 1865 without fail or intermission, and can be credited with converting the minds of many non-Black Americans to an idea known as immediatism, the notion that slavery at that time should be abolished immediately. Much of the language of the following can be credited to Horace Seldon, an avid collector of and writer on Garrison's political effect through the Liberator and other activities, whose work can be found on theliberatorfiles.com. Because Garrison chose not to take part in political parties, often there have been assessments that underestimate the intent and influence of his political interests and activities. The Liberator's pages are often full of news about what politicians are doing and saying, with an adamant focus on what they are not doing or not saying, from the local, national, and international level. His nonpartisan dedication to abolition may very well be one of the reasons he was so effective, as it allowed him to observe and report on the functions and roles of those within the parties, regularly and without party-line considerations or bias. On the masthead of the Liberator was a quite remarkable saying, "My country, the world, my countrymen, all mankind," a constant reminder of the editor's internationalist sensitivity. The newspaper not only published his thoughts and rabid critique of the moral ambiguity of politicians and abhorrent state of politics and policies of the day, but also made strides in real-world consequence. The paper urged people to sign petitions against the fugitive slave law, for personal liberty laws. 65,000 signatures on a 150-pound document was presented to the legislature. For equal school rights, for women's suffrage and full rights, against the death penalty. A thorough review of the paper would add other causes to the list, but slavery abolition was a consistent first cause. He regularly called attention to what was happening abroad as people struggled against slavery and the slave trade. So much so that Garrison, alongside the paper, founded the American Anti-Slavery Society, which, within 2 years, possessed over 150 chapters, and within 6, over 400. When President Lincoln claimed that there would be no need of bloodshed or violence unless forced upon the federal authority, Garrison provided a different alternative for the president and for the North. Quote, "Either blood must flow like water, or you must confess that the American Union is dissolved beyond the power of restoration. The covenant with death, the agreement with hell, must no longer stand. God's will's immediately and eternal overthrow. The will of God be done." In 1861, the Liberator urged people to petition the Congress and the President, calling for the use of war powers to enlist Black troops to emancipate all the enslaved. The masthead of the paper for weeks carried a quotation from John Quincy Adams asserting the constitutional right for such use of war powers. Eventually, Lincoln's famously admired ability to measure public opinion is paralleled with Garrison's view that abolitionists must bring a revolution in that public opinion. At first, in the early 1860s, 3 decades into his crusade against slavery, he measured Lincoln with strong negative judgments, saying he, quote, "had not a drop of anti-slavery in his blood, was, quote, manifestly without moral vision, destitute of hearty abhorrence of slavery." After Lincoln's meeting with Black leaders in 1962, Garrison called the event a humiliating and impertinent spectacle, and dubbed him the President of African Colonization. It would have been unthinkable at that moment to anticipate the change in Garrison, which took place by 1864. By 1864, once Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation, provided for the enlistment in the military of Black troops, and seeing the growing confidence in Lincoln, he concluded that the most politically viable option was to support Lincoln. Henry Mayer recorded that Lincoln told General H. Chamberlain that he considered himself, quote, only an instrument in the anti-slavery struggle. The logic and moral power of Garrison and the anti-slavery people of the country and the army have done it all, end quote. William Lloyd Garrison introduces the Liberator in 1831 on January 1st of that year. William Lloyd Garrison participated in reform causes in Massachusetts from a young age. In the 1820s, he advocated black colonization in Africa and the gradual abolition of slavery. Reading the work of black Northerners like David Walker changed his mind. In 1831, he created a newspaper called the Liberator. The following is the opening essay that Garrison used to explain the purpose of his paper. In the month of August, I issued proposals for publishing the Liberator in Washington City, but the enterprise, though held in different sections of the country, was palsied by public indifference. Since that time, the removal of the genius of universal emancipation to the seat of government has tendered less imperious the establishment of a similar periodical in that quarter. During my recent tour for the purpose of exciting the minds of the people by a series of discourses on the subject of slavery, every place that I visited gave fresh evidence of the fact that a greater revolution in public sentiment was to be effected in the free states, and particularly in New England, than at the South. I found contempt more bitter, opposition more active, detraction more relentless, prejudice more stubborn, and apathy more frozen than among slave owners themselves. Of course, there were individual exceptions to the contrary. This state of things afflicted, but did not dishearten me. I determined at every hazard to lift up the standard of emancipation in the eyes of the nation, within sight of Bunker Hill and in the birthplace of liberty. That standard is now unfurled, and long may it float, unhurt by the spoliations of time or the missiles of a desperate foe. Yea, till every chain be broken and every bondman set free. Let Southern oppressors tremble, let their secret abettors tremble, let their Northern apologists tremble, let all the enemies of the persecuted blacks tremble. I deem the publication of my original prospectus unnecessary, as it has obtained a wide circulation. The principles therein inculcated what will be steadily pursued in this paper, excepting that I shall not array myself as the political partisan of any man. In defending the great cause of human rights, I wish to derive the assistance of all religions and of all parties. Assenting to the, quote, self-evident truths maintained in the American Declaration of Independence, quote, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, end quote, I shall strenuously contend for the immediate enfranchisement of our slave population. In Park Street Church on the 4th of July in 1829, in an address on slavery, I unreflectingly assented to the popular but pernicious doctrine of gradual abolition. I seized this opportunity to make a full and unequivocal recantation, and thus publicly to ask pardon of my God, my country, and of my brethren, the poor slaves, for having uttered a sentiment so full of timidity, injustice, and absurdity. A similar recantation from my pen was published in the Genius of Universal Emancipation at Baltimore in September 1829. My conscience is now satisfied. I am aware that many object to the severity of my language, but is there not cause for severity? I will be as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice. On this subject, I do not wish to think or speak or write with moderation. No! Tell a man whose house is on fire to give a moderate alarm. Tell him to moderately rescue his wife from the hands of the ravisher. Tell the mother to gradually extricate her babe from the fire into which it has fallen. But urge me not to use moderation in a cause like the present. I am in earnest. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard. The apathy of the people is enough to make every statue leap from its pedestal and to hasten the resurrection of the dead. It is pretended that I am retarding the cause of emancipation by the coarseness of my invective and the precipitancy of my measures.
The charge is not true. On this question, my influence, humble as it is felt at this moment to a considerable extent, and shall be felt in coming years, not perniciously, but beneficially, not as a curse, but as a blessing, and posterity will bear testimony that I was right. I desire to thank God that he enables me to disregard, quote, the fear of man which bringeth the snare, end quote, and to speak his truth in its simplicity, arid power. Oppression, I have seen thee face to face, and met thy cruel eye and cloudy brow, but thy soul-withering glance I fear not now, for dread to prouder feelings doth give place, of deep abhorrence, scorning the disgrace of slavish knees that at thy fool-stool bow. I also kneel, but with far other vow. Do hail thee in thy horde of hirelings base. I swear, while lifeblood warms my throbbing veins, still to oppose and thwart, with heart and hand, thy brutalizing sway, till Africa's chains are burst, and freedom rules the rescued land, trampling oppression and his iron rod. Such is the vow I take. So help me God.